Good afternoon. I'd like to call the members of the Board of Historic Preservation for the city of Fort Lauderdale to order. We have a quorum. My name is Arthur Marcus, Chairman. And I guess we'll start with Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As we had determined at our last meeting, there really is no agenda today other than to discuss beginning historic preservation incentives. That's really the title of our discussion. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have that yet. Thank you. We'll start with the minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any changes or additions? Somebody would like to call for the approval of the minutes?
Well, I was wondering about at the very end when I made my motion, it doesn't really kind of indicate that it was about initial funding for consultants to do that necessarily. Just the plan, does that need to be in there or not necessarily?
Well, I think because you had said that you would, talk about it to the commission when it comes up. I know they canceled a couple of things for our next one. Perhaps it's okay if you want to amend it to say that, is just because I know you're gonna explain everything.
Sort of, that you guys have put together some things, so I haven't officially seen that. I just want to make sure
Well,
that
what,
was kind of.
yeah,
part
what
of
in the
discussion.
minute is what was sent to the clerk's office. So if the board would like to update it, the minutes would have to be amended and we have to update that with the clerk's office.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to have that somehow put in there, that phrase, initial funding for the consultants to do the revitalization plan.
Okay.
So you would just need a motion to approve the minutes as amended, you accept the amendment.
Right.
So, but Richard,
Somebody-
you can make that motion or somebody else.
Richard could make the motion too, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to make the motion?
Well, yeah, I guess I need to make the motions, but you're implying just to amend that so that includes the initial funding for consultants.
Sorry, is that the way to say your name? Sorry.
Sonia, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so do I need to repeat that or is that,
I'll second it.
okay?
All in favor?
Alright,
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay,
we need to approve the minutes.
as amended. Well, no,
That
that's
was just the motion to change the wording on that. So is that for,
Gary.
So it would be a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
all right,
Was that your motion?
that is what it was entailed, yes, it's fine.
Thank you. All right. With that, we would like to swear everybody in here in the audience who may be speaking. Hello, audience, if you are speaking, we'd like to swear you in.
If you're gonna speak to the board today, can you please raise your right hand and stand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, as we have on the agenda, the only item is to discuss historic preservation incentives for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And Tricia has sent us and also distributed a copy of the current incentives. So I think perhaps if anybody has anything to add to it, or we can go around the table, or perhaps we should discuss each item individually.
I mean, we can go over each of the existing incentives again and just talk through.
Well,
this.
just so everyone understands what they are.
Jerry, would you like to bring that website up? So attached to the, oh, not that. Go back to the actual, yes. Just the regular website. Attached to the agenda was a PDF of our existing incentives for historic preservation. And we also have this information available on the city's website. It's part of the historic preservation webpage. And there's a specific subpage that just talks about incentives. There's also links at the top of this page that provide the same document that is in the agenda, as well as two overview videos, one that talks about majority of the incentives and a separate one specifically talking about transfer of development rights. So Jerry, could you scroll down a bit? So the first incentives are dealing with tax exemptions. The first one is for historic preservation improvements, which provides a 10-year tax exemption for properties that do improvements on their property, generally in the form of an addition. This is a multiple step process for a property owner to qualify for this exemption, and that has to be done prior to any work being completed on the property. So if someone wants to take advantage of the incentive, they would apply for a certificate of appropriateness application. At the same time, they would apply for a tax exemption for the city and for the county. And then if approved, then they would continue work. After the work is completed, staff would go and verify that the work is completed, and they would have to come back to the City Historic Preservation Board, the County Historic Preservation Board, the City Commission, and the County Commission.
Is that all?
And this is all part of a state statute that
Yeah.
describes this process, and so the city's ordinance is modeled after what the state statute describes.
Isn't there a federal ordinance also? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't there?
There are federal tax incentives as well, and it's for income producing properties, and there's a whole application
Okay.
process you have to go through for that. The property also has to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay.
So there's kind of a different set of
Different
requirements,
standards, yeah.
that have to be taken into consideration, but it gives that federal tax incentive, and I think it's 20% usually.
Which is the next categories down.
Right.
Is it? Yeah.
Sonia, you had
Commercial
something.
properties.
Oh, well,
Oh.
then that's a separate thing. That's a local tax incentive. But the federal tax incentive is something that would, it usually requires someone that specializes in that kind of tax, tax process to help with the paperwork. It's not something that we're that well versed with because we just don't work with it on a regular basis. Did you have a question?
Yes, if it's a residential property and Broward County is not participating with incentives, does the applicant still have to apply to Broward County?
Like if they don't want to take advantage of the tax exemption through Broward County, or,
Well, I mean, down later on, it says that the county only provides incentives for commercial use and not for profit.
so it's two different things. So the first tax exemption is just for, it's a 10-year tax abatement. And that's separate. It's for an improvement project that has the multiple applications, it's pre-construction and post-construction approvals that are required. And then separately, there's another tax incentive that is specifically for commercial properties.
Gotcha, okay.
And that's in the city and the county, and it's actually a relatively straightforward process to obtain those tax incentives. It's 50% from each side, but it's just off of the base tax rate. It's not off of like your school taxes or any additional taxes that your property potentially have, like a medical district or anything like that. So, so it's just off the base tax rate. And so it might vary a little bit for each property, depending on how much it's valued in the beginning, and then where it's located specifically.
As you go through the incentives, can you share with us a flavor of how often they're used?
Sure. So, yeah, the 10-year tax exemption, since I've been here, it hasn't been, no one has applied for it. It is, it's a lengthy process. There's a lot of steps involved. So a property owner would have to determine if that's an advantage to them or not. And then for the commercial one, it's used relatively often. We have several I would say probably almost all of the commercial properties utilize it because they just have to fill out a one-page form with the property appraiser's office and then attach the resolution designating their property. And then it's applied, and I think the property appraiser's office sends that form out every year to be refilled out, but it's just one page, it's very simple. And then it's on the property, it takes that off automatically. So that's relatively easy. Any questions about these tax exemptions? Okay, if you scroll down, Jerry, a little bit. To the, I guess, go to the parking reductions and exemptions. I'm not sure. Jerry, is the screen in the back able to be used as well?
No, I don't think it's connected.
It's not in the same system.
No.
Okay,
Did you want to talk about transfer of development rights?
yeah, I was kind of going off of this.
I noticed that.
As well, so. So for parking reductions and exemptions, there's a few different things that could be applied. For properties that are utilized as adaptive reuse. It can be just one off-street parking space per dwelling unit. And then for commercial structures that have adaptive reuse, they're exempt up to 2,500 square feet in the area of off-street parking requirements. And then there's an exemption of all off-street parking requirements for commercial properties that are doing adaptive reuse in the regional activity center. And then in our Himmershey Historic District, it's exempt from all parking requirements. So there's some benefits to meeting those requirements. And if, you know, someone's turning them like a residential property into like a restaurant space, that can be really advantageous to them so that they don't have to go through an additional process to
Right.
obtain parking reductions.
I wanted to ask, when you say designated historic properties, that's by the city?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm. All of these incentives are based on the local designation.
okay.
If you could scroll down just a bit, Jerry, there's waivers for historic preservation, and this is related specifically to setbacks and distance separation. So there's an ability to request through the Historic Preservation Board as part of a certificate of appropriateness application to have lenience on those requirements that are in the code. Yeah,
What do you mean by a waiver?
so it's just to relieve the property owner from the requirement that's in the code. So like if your required setback is like 25 feet in the front, but you want to push it forward because it would be in line with other historic properties or,
Sure.
you know, like you have a smaller lot or something like that, we can give more lenience on that through a
Understood.
certificate of appropriateness
What
application.
about additional height to an addition, let's say?
That's not specifically outlined.
What about an additional height to the historic building? Because a lot of municipalities allow, like in Miami Beach, you can do a one-story addition set back from the roof line, the parapet.
Well, it wouldn't, so you wouldn't necessarily need a waiver for additional height. Like,
Okay,
the zoning district has a overall height limit, so like a lot of Silver Bend is an RMM 25 or RML 25, and the total height limitation there is 35 feet. And so if you have a one-story house and you want to build a two-story addition on the back, you're certainly able to do
Okay.
that. You don't need any sort of waiver
okay,
to do that. You would just have to have a certificate of appropriateness.
Of course.
To do that. So, so I don't know if it's completely,
well, no, that answers the question.
okay.
What comes down to the zoning, because like the police station had a different height restriction because of the zoning that was in place for that, so it depends on the facility of the building
Right.
already
there-
existing in the zoning code.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so like the police station is in community facility zoning, and so they're a little bit lower than their neighboring structures on Broward Boulevard, which allow up to 150 feet in height. But the police station property because of CF, it has to be a little lower
Right.
anyway. But,
Okay,
and then we'll go to transfer of development rights. This is a relatively new program. And, it basically allows the transfer of either units or floor area to another location from a historic property to a new development. There's a lot of criteria as far as how, properties that can qualify would be able to qualify. So, there's two things in the code. One is a sending site and the other is a receiving site. The sending site is your historic property. That has to be a designated historic landmark or a contributing property. And they can apply to receive something called a certificate of eligibility to understand how much they could actually transfer to another site, either in density units or in floor area, which would equate to height to another new development site. The new development site has to meet certain requirements as well. It has to be located in certain parts of the city that are outlined in our code that are eligible to receive those additional rights. But that is a separate application. It's called a certificate of transfer.
so the key is to be designated as historic, so you can be a sending site.
That's the first requirement.
Yes.
There's also a possibility for people that haven't become designated yet, but are eligible for designation to obtain kind of like a pre-approval for a certificate of eligibility, just because if they want to understand how much they could transfer before they designate their property.
So is there a list of properties that are eligible, or I didn't,
Well, the list of
realize
properties
that.
that are eligible are historic landmarks. And then our contributing properties in Scale Open Historic District. And then we've been doing surveys, architectural resource surveys throughout the city. And any property that's identified there as a potential historic landmark or part of a potential historic district as a contributing building could apply for that predetermination, but they have to ultimately be designated before they could do a certificate of transfer.
so is there a map or a listing?
Yeah.
On the city website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have an interactive map of the architectural resource surveys that have been completed. We also have an interactive map of our historic landmarks, and we have an interactive map for the Scale Open Historic District.
Okay,
So
How often has this been utilized?
So it's a relatively new program. I think it was adopted in 2021. Yep. And Mr. Adams, who's here, he is actually our first customer who has applied for a certificate of eligibility that has been issued to him. And he's been exploring the potential for doing the transfer.
oh, great.
Is asked, Alan had asked earlier too, with the parking and the
Oh, yeah.
setbacks, have those been used?
So the setbacks on occasion, particularly in Sailboat Bend, that has come up, especially with like new developments coming in and things like that. And then with parking, it's always used in the Himmershey Historic District. And, but we haven't, I don't know if we've had another specific case come in recently that
Okay,
utilized that request since it's been adopted. A lot of these that we're going over have actually been implemented in the last couple of years, with the exception of the 10-year tax abatement. And yeah, that's.
but to go back to Alan's question, how often are these used? I mean, I know they're relatively newly on the books.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've gone over it, but the
Yeah.
parking reduction and exemptions in the historic district, in the Himmershey Historic District,
Right,
it's a total exemption, so a lot of the properties utilize that, like as new businesses come in, they don't have to qualify for any new parking. And then, like I said, I don't recall a certain situation in the last couple of years where someone's really needed it. So we haven't applied it for the parking, and then the setback waivers have come into play in Sailboat Bend multiple times.
okay.
Can you explain the paragraph? Yeah, like the police station, were they given an exemption for the limitations on parking for that, or?
Yeah,
That they had
it
an
wasn't,
application
it's not an
that
adapted for
changed.
use. So I didn't qualify for this program. It has to be a landmark or a contributing building to qualify for this. A lot of properties can go through like a separate process to request a parking reduction. I'm not sure if the police station did that. I don't think so, but it does have a separate path that it follows. Yeah, if they qualify.
I was just gonna ask if anyone in our audience would like to say something. You're certainly welcome to now or at any time.
Kind of one at a time. If you don't mind.
Can you just
Jay-
state your name?
Jay Adams. So you guys are talking about parking, just curious, the second bullet point is my zoning preference, on 3 properties. The last bullet point, can you explain that? I'm not sure what that means.
What are you referring to?
In the parking reduction, there's 3 bullets.
Okay,
Off-street parking requirement for commercial. property.
okay, the last one.
The second one, by the way, is typical parking that everybody has, just what it is. The last one may be an advantage, I don't know, I'm not sure what it means.
Any off-street parking requirements for any commercial property that's located in a regional activity center
So it's a larger facility, yours are smaller.
that's being completed as like an adaptive reuse project, so like.
Yeah, warehouse that was being reused for something that's
So
historic.
if you have a 50,000 square foot warehouse, and you're making it adaptive reuse historic,
And it's in the
there's no
regional,
parking required?
if it's in the regional activity center.
Regional activity, there's a bunch of regional activity centers, right, most of downtown, so my properties would qualify for no parking?
So if it's considered an adaptive reuse,
That I did before. Well, no, it's maybe not a reuse, what does reuse mean?
Well, what are you making it
Was it for
into?
the original use section?
It's like you're keeping, yeah,
Oh, no. Okay. No one qualifies for that hardly, but, okay, so I converted an existing office building. Then convert, rehab existing office and retail. So those do not qualify.
it was an existing house to retail.
No.
Well, one of them
Office
was.
to office.
Actually, one of them.
Okay.
was it historic?
Office, retail does not qualify. Right.
On transfer development rights, what is the entity that holds those rights before they're transferred, or does the sending site transfer them directly?
They transfer directly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a private real estate transaction.
Okay.
But the city is involved with just the paperwork and the reporting and.
So does the city make the introduction of the
No.
2 parties? They don't, okay.
No, not necessarily, and we haven't really gotten far enough along, like,
Has anybody used this yet? It's, 'cause I know it can be
There's
tricky.
one of the persons.
Yeah,
Mr. Adams,
Which hasn't done it yet, right?
he hasn't completed a transfer, no.
Can-
So we get into that real soon, if you guys want to, but before we get there. Just a couple little things there, on the federal tax credit. 20 cents for every dollar. Supposedly, you can't use them, I can't. Anybody that makes over 83,000 a year as alternative minimum tax. law. So I've been for 18 years trying to use my credits, they're worthless. They'd say. If you're a big corporation, maybe you can use them, but for someone like me, you can't use them. So this is a flag.
That's the minimalization tax credit.
Federal, but I had 2 national registered buildings.
It's a federal program,
Right.
It's not listed on.
it's not on this.
So it's not, you know, and there's no
Well, that's
state taxes.
Congress, so.
I was just trying to understand.
No, that wasn't saying that to you, I was saying.
But the other 2 with the city and the county, you are able to utilize
Mine,
those.
I can't, because I've already done the work, right?
Right, yeah. You haven't, you can't utilize the 10-year tax abatement unless you were to do another rehabilitation project and like. Do some sort of addition or improvement that would change the value of the property, that would be where it'd be advantageous. He does take advantage of the commercial tax.
Right.
So I'll talk about that, I'll talk about that now. So the commercial tax credit on your real estate taxes, right? Yeah, so that's the one thing that's a little bit, is 15% of your tax bill. So I paid 80 grand tax. Less 15%. But here's the kicker. Being a historic building is so expensive and you can't sell it. It's hard to sell. It's not worth what it's assessed for. So the assessor appraises it as if it's not historic. The land's not historic,
Mhm.
you're losing money in historic buildings big time. So I wish there was more of a historic, real estate tax credit. I wish we were across the board with, so the big one is the school board. The next one is city assessment.
But I don't, does the city have jurisdiction over these?
No,
So we've been over this, it's in the statutes, that's something you would have to go to the board of legislature
Right.
and amend it. Or preempt it, we can't go past what they've authorized us to do. When it comes to that, there's a statute on it and tells us exactly what we can do, and we can't go further than that. So that's the board of legislature.
Okay,
So it's a little something that's just not much. And that's the only thing there is that I found.
so what else would you suggest? I mean, having going through the process.
The assessor can maybe assess it at a lower number.
It's
Yeah,
like
but-
county
But
property
that's-
appraiser.
That's
That's
the
a-
15%.
We have no control over
The
that.
15% you're indicating is like, so if your tax bill is $10,000, you're saving $1,500 in your
Right.
tax bill.
Right. And that's what it is.
Helpful.
Okay.
It's better.
Well, so rather than money, are there any incentives zoning wise that would help a project? We're also talking incentives zoning wise, besides money. There are zoning incentives that we're talking about in terms of decreasing the setbacks necessary for an addition,
But there's certain things already exist, so you can't change them.
but you can add to it.
No, you can't. I don't think so. It's hard, very hard. I can't even put up. a
It's not that hard.
It's hard to do anything, to change a building. I mean, they're impossible. Historic building.
I'm curious on the TDR program, what you're the only person that's applied for this, and folks that I've talked to about this that are in this business say the program is set up in a way that it can't, like, it's just not advantageous to be utilized. So I'm curious on your experience and how you're making it work for you.
I'll give you, my take on it. Steve's land use attorney.
Yeah.
It's complicated. But when it boils down to it, it's not a cheap program. I gotta hire architects. We gotta do studies. I gotta get updated floor plans, sign and seal. I gotta do update surveys, all this stuff and apply. And Broward County, Fort Lauderdale has no units right now. So even if it worked, you can't get them. If they did have units,
When you say units, you mean giving sites?
units for, no, the county has a certain number of apartment units called,
Oh,
or condo,
per year.
residential units that they allow.
Right.
Now there's zero.
Got
No,
it.
it's not per year, it's per allotment, isn't it, Steve? It's not per year.
Let's stand up.
Okay,
Steve Tilbrook at Ackerman. Jay is one of my friends and clients, and Jay's been working on the transfer of development rights program for some time, and to his credit, he actually, well, the concept is set up to allow historic properties to transfer certain rights that they can't use because they're historic, development rights over and above what's existing, so building height or density to another receiving site. That's the concept. And the way it works is the historic site has to apply for the program initially, and they have to measure what those rights are that they seek to transfer, and then the city evaluates it. And then they grant a certificate that you can get this thing that you can transfer. It's kind of a vague concept, right? Because it's, what is it you're transferring? In this case, in the current case, it's a new program. It's really density and building area for floor area ratio. I think those are the two real core issues that you can get. What you can't get, and what the code doesn't allow now, what we wanted to bring to your attention and maybe ask you to inquire about, is this concept of units. Because units and density are two different things, right? Density is the ability within your code to meet your density limitations and or exceed those density limitations in a certain zoning district. In many of the zoning districts, there's not any density limitation, so there's really no value in transferring to those districts like the Regional Activity Center downtown because it's unlimited density. The way that you regulate in the Regional Activity Center is units, is the accessibility to units and flex units, okay? And that's where there's scarcity in Fort Lauderdale right now. Those units are doled out by Broward County to the city, and then each application on a first come, first served basis can apply for those units. And we're currently out of or nearly out of units, okay? And what this transfer of development rights code doesn't allow is the transfer of units. It allows for the transfer of density, but not units. The real value, then the reason that Jay can't find a receiving site or someone that's willing to compensate him for his development rights is because it doesn't include units, right? So, and there's a limit of 10 density units, 10 units of density per acre, I think, per acre or per site.
What, excuse me,
Per acre.
Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how do you define a density of acre?
Density is like.
Well, just for the-
Square footage per acre, like, so for a single family home district, RS 4.4 is 4.4 units per acre of density, that's your residential, that's your most restrictive residential category. So there's the ability to transfer density, but not the ability to transfer units. We want to challenge you to consider and to ask the staff whether you could also transfer units. You could amend your code to also transfer units and also eliminate or increase the restriction on only 10 units per acre that can be received on a receiving site. So that's pretty restrictive, and a lot of these sites are looking for more than 10 units per acre. So those are two areas that would create more value in the units that were in the transfer of development rights that we're seeking.
Aren't the units of density a county issue?
That's a good question. That's a good question, and I don't have an answer, but perhaps it might be, but there are ways around it.
I think our city attorney has something to say.
Yeah, I'll let Tricia go too, but just to clarify, so density is defined in our code. It's actually a legal definition, so it's 4728.2. And it says density is the number of dwelling units permitted within an area divided by the net acreage of the area. Okay, so it's dwelling units. That's what's defined in our code.
Okay,
Now, there's not unlimited density in the rack. How it works is there's a pool of units, first come, first serve. As developments are approved, they take the number of units that they're eligible for based on the site specific, requirements they need to meet, et cetera. But the point is that we get a certain amount from the county, and when it runs out, maybe we can go back and get more. I don't know how that part works, but the bottom line is that is not something that this board can say, Tricia, amend the ordinance, give you more units. That comes from the county, and that would take requesting it, but land use plan amendment, et cetera. And there's certain areas, I'll let Tricia go into more detail if she wants, but that's just how to bluntly put it. So
that process could be that this board requested that the commissioners do it, and the commissioners request that the county does it. That would be the process.
well, yes and no. Well, you go ahead.
And there are
Planner.
instances where the county does create exemptions for regional activities and for units. For instance, there's a buy down for affordable housing. If you can buy down affordable housing and get new units just out of thin air, the county has created this ability to do that. They could do it for historic properties too. I think it's appropriate to ask for it and to try to work it out, because otherwise there's really not a lot of value to these transfer and development rights. So we are actually talking to Ella Parker about this option, this possibility. I think it warrants some consideration and some study and conversation with Broward County. We're willing to facilitate that conversation as well. The county can do it. They have done it. for affordable housing, why not do it for historic properties too? That's, and I didn't mean to interrupt, Tricia. I think there is some question about how exactly they could be created with the county, or whether there's an exemption from the county, where they could just sort of create new units out of thin air through this transfer of development rights process.
You mentioned that there's, I'm sorry, but real fast, you mentioned that there's the county is pursuing this with the city. Or are they ongoing talks or,
Well, we're suggesting that it should be.
oh,
subject
okay,
to Conversation. We're asking for the city commission, for the city staff to consider this as a way to improve your transfer of development rights ordinance.
Richard?
I was just gonna ask the question of how would the route go in accomplishing some of this? Would you be better off going to the Broward County Historic Preservation Board and asking them because it's a county issue? Or is it because the property is located in the city of Fort Lauderdale that you're required to come to us first?
I don't think it's a county historic preservation issue, okay, because they have another set of things that they deal with. The question is whether this city wants to try to improve their transfer of development rights ordinance in this bill. And and to evaluate with the county how to do it. There's a question. I don't know the answer. It may require a land use plan amendment. Maybe you could just do it through a code amendment. I don't know. It's something we have to talk about. And we encourage you to start the conversation. We'll start the conversation, but it's a conversation worthy of being had. Now, the limitation on how many units can go in terms of density to a site is in your code. You can change that. Okay, that's within your discretion. The city's discretion. That was a sort of arbitrary number that was put into the code.
It wasn't really arbitrary.
Well, okay,
It's based on the Broward County Land Use Plan as far as the amount of density we can add using the TDR program that's described specifically in there, and that's how we were able even to create the TDR program. And then within our comprehensive plan, the maximum amount of density is units per acre within that plan. So, there's a lot of things that kind of overlap and cross over that created that number. It
it's
wasn't
a complicated
Out of thin air.
process, and it's
Yeah.
a complicated code. You guys put a lot of time and effort in developing the code. We're here to tell you it's a good idea. It's not working real well. There's just limited. What you can actually transfer is limited in terms of its marketability.
And I've worked, we've talked to hundreds of people. We've got a program in Washington State that is called everyone, like all land use attorneys. I spent a lot of time at it, and there's no money out there to even make an offer. So I don't know if you know too, downtown, most of our downtown is unlimited density. There isn't, you can go straight to the sky.
right,
So these things aren't needed for that either. So, most of the developments don't need it. You talk development, level's not a problem.
And density is based on in the downtown area. Well, right now there aren't.
Again, it is not unlimited density. Okay, I just defined it for you. Units are the density.
all right.
The pool of units that they can take from is site specific. There's not unlimited density downtown. The FAA has requirements also for the
Yeah.
height. You can't go to the sky. Just that's really repeated all over the place, and that's just not true.
Okay,
So I
So
just
what is
want
the
to
height limit?
clarify that. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's important that the board, me as the lawyer for the board, I have to clarify that for you. That is my job.
okay,
We also have a form-based code that is in the downtown rack and in multiple other racks throughout the city, and that really dictates how a building is formed and ultimately how much density is in that location. It's based, like Shari is saying, it's based on the site. It's based on FAA limitations. There's a lot of factors that go into it. You have to have setbacks.
In the city center section of your downtown, and Sherry, I don't mean to disagree with you, but regional activity center has a maximum number of units, okay? That's allocated to regional activity center. That's not density. Okay, density is the number of units you can use on a site, a per acre site. In the regional activity center, city center, there is no limit on the number of units. On the density for individual site. It is limited by the number of units that are available in the rack, but it's limited on a first come, first served
What do you
basis.
mean by a rack?
The regional activity center,
Okay,
which is how units are allocated in the downtown, is allocated to the regional activity center, and then it's on a first come, first served basis that it goes to a site.
Shari,
Just to clarify again, the code defines what density is, I'll just say this one more time. 472842, our code states what density is. Just to not confuse you, the density are the units. It says that in the code. It says density is defined as the number of units permitted within an area divided by the net acreage of the area, okay? It is the units. We're talking about the same thing.
But the,
Okay.
the net TDR, just so we understand it,
There's no limit on a
No,
per acre site.
there's not.
Per acre is
But then
unlimited.
that's assuming what you're saying, then you wouldn't be able to put 20-story buildings in downtown, and you can't. By your definition.
What I'm saying is that with the pool of units, right, I don't know how many are left. But there is not unlimited density in the sense that these pool of units are here. You can take a certain amount based on what you're trying to develop. And when we get to zero, you can't take any more. So it's not unlimited. That's what I'm saying. So in the rack, pool of units, they're given to us by the county.
Right,
So
right.
you can't
But whether-
exceed that. So in other words, unlimited means, forget the county, you can do whatever you want. That's
Right,
not
but
true.
whether 10 units or 1,000 units are put on property A versus property B is like, it's up to the discretion of the city.
No.
No, because, for example, I don't know how many units are left, there's like, there's like
Assuming
a
that there
chart,
are enough units left for the request.
but that's what I'm saying, is that there are not unlimited units ever.
Correct. The county gives an allotment. I understand that, but I'm saying within that allotment, the city has a lot of discretion on how they allocate those in the rack
Not
area.
necessarily, so it all depends on what you're building and certain things that you have to qualify for. So it's literally not, I couldn't say to you, hey, that building can get 400 units, just
Sure.
randomly, no.
Sure.
They have to do a lot of evaluation at the staff end, so it's just not unlimited. At anywhere you take it, it's not unlimited. They literally couldn't say to somebody, hey, for that, you get as much units as you want. It's just not possible.
I'm not debating the unlimited. What I'm debating is like 5.5 per acre is clearly not a hard rule that goes across the city, because we get definitely more than that downtown versus up where I live in commercial. So there is some discretion to the city, from the city council on what they permit downtown versus what they permit.
it's all the zoning
It's
districts.
all zonings and everything, which is why you get higher stuff downtown and more density downtown versus elsewhere. That's all. I think you guys are both saying the same thing, but I think that there is I do think that I think all they're saying is there's a lot of discretion from the city that
No,
occurs. I mean,
as
there's,
Shari's saying, there
You
isn't.
don't, like, for example, as much as we would, they're not the only people that ask for more units, right? There's like, it's a first come, first served,
Sure.
so it's like, oh my God, we want units. They're not the only people we hear from. So that, to give us units is ultimately up to the county. In other words, we can make all kind of arguments, but that is the county that actually has to give it to us eventually. Let's say she says, yes.
but the city gets a pool.
It got a pool. The problem is the pool that has dwindled down. So that's why they and lots of other folks want units.
But won't there be a new pool in January next month?
I don't know.
It's not annually.
Oh, it's not on.
No, it's not annual. It's how often do they do it? Steve, you know?
It's based upon a city application, so the city will have to apply. And then the county may create strings attached to those. But I think the point I was trying to make before we had the bullet, parsing is the transfer of development rights program grants density. But the density has no value unless there's units that allow you to use that density in the regional activity center, or flex units that allow you to use it in the commercial. You can't, density means nothing unless there's units available.
Wouldn't your arguments be better to the city commission?
Yeah, we wanted to start here, you know,
Okay.
we wanted you to hear what the challenge is. We're gonna start with staff
Okay,
and we're gonna work our way to the commission.
Sure.
We've already had some conversations with them, but we wanted you to be aware of the reason that the transfer development rights program has had limited success.
Tricia, can I just ask you a question? The TDR program is solely for historic properties. It's the only ones that can be extracted from.
yes,
Why? Why was that part of?
Well, I mean, it was
it's an
It's a new-
incentive.
But I'll get there.
it's a
Okay,
new program, a
Right.
new incentive.
right,
It's something that, like, the Broward County Land Use Plan
Right.
allows for other types of properties to qualify, like, if you wanted to write that into your code, but, you know, you don't want to necessarily start writing a code for all these things. You can't figure out just one.
but the incentive was really sort of monetization off of units or density. Let's call them, put them in a
Right.
basket together, so that those could be traded to a developer for money.
Right.
Right. We're hitting a roadblock where somewhere along the way it's clogged up, right? How long has it been, since it's implemented, how long has it been on the books?
2021, I think, it's March 2021.
So we're rolling into what will be year 3.
Yeah.
In March. What do you think we could do to create a clearer system or an easier path? So just follow me on this. So that if, for example, in Sailboat Bend, you have an acre, right? Most of the zoning, not waterfront, is 25, right? Whether it's RMM or RML.
Mhm.
Am I understanding correctly that even though you have that zoning table at 25 units per acre, you're capped at 10 as the TDRs would roll? No, it's 25, correct?
So
What-
we're talking about a ascending site.
Ascending site,
Okay,
Right.
ascending site calculation is based on what's their existing.
correct?
So if you had a 1 acre site.
Right.
You had a
One house,
single family home there, then the calculation is pretty simple.
24 units, 24
24
TDRs.
units,
Okay,
you can transfer to another site.
okay.
The receiving site is what would be where it gets a little more complicated.
But these are apples to apples, meaning if the pool is empty and I send 24 units, Arthur sends 24 units, we just add these up, 24, 48, keep going, right? And they can pluck from those or purchase them from a private entity if we form a special purpose entity, and they can buy them from us, correct?
How you do it on the private end.
Well, it's just all, we're just talking
Yeah.
practically. I'm not saying you're making a position on it. So how do we allow for that to be the case? Here's why I'm asking. I don't follow the incentive for the historic part of it unless we're able to capture the monetary side of it. It doesn't exist. It's too opaque. So how do we work through the channel of the workshop to get there? That's the question. How do we make it so that it can be monetized? Because frankly, I see zero incentive for historic properties other than getting money. And you know what? I like that. I like that a lot because I feel like there's been a suppression in some of the property values because of some of the things that I've been in this room talking about for a long time. So I'd love to see it break through. How does it break through? While still being mindful of the people that might be able to sell them, qualifying them to the understanding of what they're worth and not just letting it be a grab and having them understand exactly what they have in their possession. Because if we can aggregate 250 units, they're worth a lot more than my 24 and Arthur's 24. And so how does that happen? How does that communication happen?
I have a question regarding that, because once they're sold, does that mean that property owner
Is restricted,
develop
right?
that additional
Yeah.
unit?
Yeah,
So
Fine, that's what you're selling.
Property owner then loses
Yeah.
that benefit for any future use of it, so.
For,
really not
for consideration though, for consideration, no, there is an incentive.
Yeah,
You
well,
lose the right, you restrict
When
it.
we go to sell a property in the future, it's
But-
gone.
Yes, but there's a restrict,
But wouldn't it be an
Property
incentive
owners
to
don't
keep
see the
it?
value there.
Yeah, yeah.
but unless you get to that point of sort of like, let's roll it down the table and see where we can actually capture how you monetize it. I'm missing the whole incentive part,
Would
like,
there be a listing site or a way
Yeah, I
for people to
mean-
list
And I
their,
think
what they
that's,
want to sell?
it was interesting to me that they were here because I talked to some folks about this TDR just as we kicked around. And basically, everybody that I've talked to on the development end or land use basically said it's non-functional, like you can't actually like make it work into an actual development deal.
Right.
Like, because of the way that it's set up, and that's why I was curious for them on what.
Yeah,
their
so-
experience.
So if you divest it, like I own a duplex in Sailboat Bend. I live in a unit. I have another unit. I'm entitled to build, I forget now, I think it was 4 at the time. So I can sell 2 of my units, right? Let's say,
No, because you're not contributing property.
okay, so I'll label my property contributing, then I have the right, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm there with you on the logic, because nothing else is really gonna ever happen with it, right? So I have my 2 units. If there's an aggregation of that with some organization to how they do it, how does that then happen? How do we take the 100 units that have been aggregated or the 250 units that have been aggregated, and how do we sell them? How do we go to the city with them? How does it happen? How does the function of how it's supposed to turn over actually function?
Well, the way that our code is written is that they're private transactions.
Okay.
So the city doesn't get involved with the negotiating, the connection. You know, if anybody wanted to call and ask for, you know, who's applied for a certificate of eligibility, we can certainly give out that information. As far as what properties have. We
Yeah.
also have like the maps on our online that list out the properties that are designated if someone wanted to reach out specifically to someone. Like as a developer, as a development side. You know, it's a difficult.
Yeah,
question
no, I appreciate
to
that.
answer
But you're asking the
specifically,
right
but-
questions.
Well, because the
The
dilemma,
answer
what we're hearing is like.
securitization of
Right,
that.
whether it's
Yeah.
the actual warrant thing or the transfer rights, it does really no value because of the fact that nobody ever uses or can use it because it's a time consuming process or
Well, it
it's
is
not
a
something that
benefit.
people can use.
I mean, it can be a benefit. There's, you know, other cities that it does function in. The city of Fort Lauderdale is different in the way that units are allocated,
Mhm.
units are distributed. So that I think makes it a little bit more challenging than in other locations.
Yeah,
And it may take a little bit of time to figure that out.
yeah,
Like in the city of Miami, I was working there when their PDR program was relatively new. And a local developer really broke the ground with it. And, you know, she kind of made it work for her and her developments and sold off her TDRs from her historic properties to new developments within the city. And now it's a fully functional program, but you know, it's hard in the beginning because you are figuring out how it functions in that location and that municipality. I think the code is actually really clear. It gives you step by step of what needs to happen, but we can't broker a deal.
Are there any incentives that you might think of adding, since you know this program so well, or these different programs?
I mean, from the things that we have the power to add. I
Well,
think
we can suggest
we can add-
anything.
We've done a lot of research. I mean, the only thing that's really left is direct funding, which is very challenging because there's a lot of restrictions from the city's end as far as us giving money. We can't do that.
So I have a question.
And I would suggest to the board, if maybe
Pardon?
you want to have designated time
historic
for.
properties are on the
Yeah.
list.
like the seat,
I
just so
I
that
think we'd
we
like to
have-
come back to the
Yeah.
board for a few moments, okay?
So, yeah, just before we move off the topic, the rights that are transferable, that's just with respect to density and not necessarily a unit. Right, is that correct?
Depends who you ask.
Because I think what we may have heard is that
It translates. to
it
units.
is, exactly, but like, there's 2 different components in the formula, like density is the formula and it's X over Y and X is units, right? And Y is acreage. If that's the case, is it true that some zones are not restricted by density, but only by units? Is that right? Sherry, I know you said earlier, but like,
No, it's just that I just don't want it to come off like I'm arguing. with
No,
you.
and I
I'm
think
just
you're,
honestly trying to.
I think you're doing a good job
nice
of trying to
about this.
clarify.
So it's just a matter of, so normally, right, residential units in the city, 60 dwelling units per acre, other places, right, not downtown, right?
Right.
You just throw that.
But
out.
downtown is only unit
So that
restricted?
downtown's like, hey, county, give us some units. They say, let's say 30,000, right? So city goes over the years, develop, all of a sudden, we have 500 units left. You want some more?
No,
That's where
I
we're
understand
at.
that,
So,
but I think the question I'm only asking is, are there any density restrictions on the downtown?
that's what I'm saying is that how it works is literally Trisha and like a whole bunch of other people go around a table and evaluate an application. And they
But
will,
it's unit based, not density based, correct?
so it's literally the same thing in a calculation. So basically it's like this. They will literally say, all right, what are you building? And they will go over everything from their professional standpoint. And then they will allocate what they see fit in the requirements
Got
that
it.
these
So-
people meet. How much density they get. So you would never be able to pick up a random person from DSD and say, excuse me, for that particular acreage, how much density? No, you have to submit the application. Then at that point, you're allocated a unit. with the
So it's a
professional.
review based on the entire application and density may be one factor that you consider.
So the density
That-
gets allocated based on the code requirements and different things that they have to meet with the engineers and all the other people on Trisha's team. So it's
I was just trying to
It's not a simple-
understand, because it sounded like what
If
if
we're simpler, but.
it
it's
sounded like what the
different. So-
visitors were saying is that, hey, if we could transfer, the unit, once it's been calculated in whatever zone it is we're selling from to now we're selling it as a unit rather than as a density.
So I don't think there's an
density number.
issue from the sending site as far as making any sort of calculation. That's not.
Right, that's easy.
Yeah,
It's on the
like,
receiving side where
it's the
not,
receiving site.
it's not a. like you were
where,
saying, it's
you
not a
know,
hard
like-
and fast rule.
We have restrictions in the Broward County Land Use Plan. We have certain parameters that we have to follow through that. That give us those threshold maximums of the additional 10 units per acre. And so
Okay,
that's where we get a little stuck with that. That's what we have to follow. That's what we're allowed to
gotcha,
implement
okay,
in our code.
thank you for
And
clarifying.
just to repeat one thing that Shane said, density is only one factor that the city would can
We're
evaluate,
talking about a new development.
right?
And so that's, in an evaluation of any new development that's going into our downtown BRAC, where they're following a form-based code. There's other factors to consider as part of that, like Shari's mentioning with engineering and demand on systems like water and sewer and things like that.
Capacity, all kinds of things. So I wish we could be able to tell you 50 per acre, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work that way. So.
So Trisha, one other question, I'm sorry, just jump in, but what? You just apply and then all of a sudden you're contributing, there's no analysis of the property actually being contributing, like, does it,
Yes, there is an
There-
analysis.
okay.
So, like with the Sailboat Bend Historic District, a couple of years ago, there was a updated architectural resource survey that was approved by the city commission, recommended for approval by the ATV, approved by the city commission,
Right.
the official list.
okay, but like, I want to submit my place. You review it and you tell me yes or no?
No, we
Or-
would have to do an updated survey and we would have to be requested to update the survey.
So only the properties that are on the survey at this present time are eligible to
Correct.
even participate. Do we know, can we calculate to what degree? What that adds up to in terms of just doing an overlay of the zoning to understand how many units are even eligible to be into this pool? Because maybe we're talking about a pool that's so limited, it may not be. I want to say worth all the time to think about it, but it may not be. I mean, if you only have 1,000 units that are eligible, 2,000 to what degree? Do you
But you're
quantify?
suggesting like taking a look holistically at all of Sailboat Bend.
Yeah,
To create.
I'm trying to understand what we're talking
I
about.
think that gets really complicated as far as like,
Isn't it just a land,
but,
the zoning
well-
table calculation?
but are you just wanting to know the information, or you're suggesting?
Both.
Further, that it would be some sort of like multiple property situation where there's multiple owners.
No, I'm just trying to understand, like, we have six programs on here, maybe 7, we have a handful of programs plus, right? If we're spending the bulk of time discussing something that has the ability to gain traction to be something that can be utilized versus, are we talking about something that really, I don't know to what degree they're valuable to a property owner if there's gonna be de minimis money thrown at it, because what's gonna happen is a developer's gonna go around and grab a crumb from everybody and never really pay up for it. And what's gonna be lost is, I guess what I'm not understanding is you have to be contributing, but you're already contributing, right? So you're gonna then have those rights sold But if there's
Well,
no,
The incentive to maintain your property as historic, right? So like the idea is that if you're selling, you know, you wouldn't be really developing your property significantly anyway if it's
Sure.
already a historic property.
right,
So you want to maintain that long term, you want to maintain that single family home or whatever it is on
right,
that property. And selling off some of the units isn't gonna make a big difference to that property because you really aren't gonna develop it to like further potential in the future. You also aren't required to sell off all the units.
right. But that's what,
You can retain
but
some of
then,
them to use later,
well, then where's the incentive? I guess for the historic property owner,
that they would get money back.
but but we just did, we just kind of got to the idea that it's not really much money.
Well, we don't know. I mean, we haven't
mean-
had a transfer. We can't really say that. And
What about in Miami, in other cities?
every city is very
Different, of course.
It's very, very different. And so it's hard to say, you know, like what it looks like.
Yeah,
And then it's also market demand. So it changes over time. So like one day it may be, you know, 1,000 units per acre, or sorry, $1,000 per unit. And the next day it might be $10,000 per unit. There's some cities that have like more control over what that may look like, or they have some system in place that might make,
Marketplace, kind of.
make a
Yeah.
marketplace in a
Makes
better
sense.
way, like, there was another incentive program in the city of Miami that they did set a market value for square footage in different locations in the city, and that sort of dictated what that market value was, whether it actually met the real estate demands at the moment, because it wasn't updated extremely frequently. It was, you know, say it was updated every five years or so. And so that's gonna create a different market value. So at the moment, we have, I think it was alluded to, there's an ability to do affordable housing in the city, and you can either pay in lieu of a price per unit or actually develop affordable housing. And the payment in lieu is currently $10,000 per unit. So whether or not that dictates it or not, potentially.
is there a limit on the percentage of a project that can be affordable?
It's a whole,
That's
it's a
all,
very
okay.
complicated thing
I shouldn't have
as
asked,
far
yeah,
as what needs to be included in the.
but that's a good incentive.
Mhm.
Tricia, how many houses are on the register of properties or on the historic or on the survey? Excuse me, the city survey, the most recent one,
Like the overall, like
total number.
what we've been doing with the architectural research
Yeah,
survey,
how many houses or how many properties do we have on there?
couple thousand,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
They
Like two,
will be contributing on
Um,
the store.
so there's properties that have been identified as potentially eligible as historic landmarks, and there's some properties that have been identified as part of potential historic district.
Yeah.
And then within those potential historic districts, some are contributing, some are non-contributing, and I don't know those exact numbers.
Might I suggest a future discussion where we can actually look at the list and the map together and just understand it better?
Yeah. I mean, usually like the board would make a motion to put that on the
No.
future agenda.
I can't make a motion.
Yeah.
Well, are we talking about any other issues yet before we move on to do that type of motion, or are we done with the current state?
But, yeah, I mean, for the most part, we've covered the instances. There's a few others just that come into play at different moments, depending on, you know, what the situation is with a particular property.
Tricia, I just have one question on this document. I think it's great. And I think it's really good foresight that at least the city is trying to implement some of these policies. How aware are people who come into the city of this if they don't bring their attorneys with them?
Yeah, I mean, if there's something that would apply, you know, there's that. We don't necessarily, like if someone comes in for a certificate of appropriateness application, if they don't need a setback waiver, if they
Obviously.
don't need a parking reduction, we're not necessarily giving that information and talking about that specifically.
Okay. So they're all made aware in the application process.
Yeah.
Okay. getting back to potential motions.
I was just gonna say that I think that, you know, we've talked a lot about incentives and we have a lot of homeowners that come here and. You know, they face some financial burdens with complying with a lot of our regulations. And so this conversation has come about because like we've often kicked around, like, how do you provide some incentive for people to have that additional kind of financial burden and also like that additional like regulatory burden? They have to come to us to talk to us, a group of, you know, 7 different people, and it's different every time they come, and it's up to this board on whether or not they can have 4 mittens or 6 mittens, or, you know, it's just kind of a process that, you know, trying to find some clarity for homeowners and also some incentive for it. And the one thing that, while I think that Trisha and her team have done like the best that they can, the reality is that what this kind of highlights for me is that there really isn't a lot of financial incentive for people. And like, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but that to me, it just has really highlighted that what spurred this discussion is like still a point here because, you know, either there's not somebody creative enough that's come along to try to figure out the TDR program, or, you know, it just is, you know, it's just not utilized to the degree, or people have not figured out how to financially make that work. And I think that's a shame because when you have that, we're going to still face the same challenge from homeowners month after month that's coming before us. And it's, you know, I don't know how to fix that. If I did, I think we all probably.
Well, it's one of the things I tried to bring up before, but it appears that from the information that the key financial incentive is based on income producing properties and not private residential properties. And so we can't really talk about zoning, but you know, that is some of the issues. If you make it adaptive reuse or you provide for these properties to be mixed use, there's an opportunity for some incentives. We have said before, shops or facilities where it's a bed and breakfast or whatever, that it's an income producing property and therefore they can apply for some of these tax
So
incentives.
would you suggest adding another category?
Well, just to provide, whether there's, I don't know if there's such a thing as a special purpose district where you can have things where entire districts, wherever we have a historic district like Hemmershey or Seville Bend in particular, I guess those are 2 primary areas, that you either open it up to everybody that have an opportunity, or you specify zoning changes, so allow certain properties or certain streets to be this type of zoning opportunity for people to be a mixed use or adaptive reuse. But that goes back to the zoning board. It's not something we can particularly do, other than making a recommendation that the city does that. That's the primary one, but I mean, I'm assuming that there's other programs you can consider, like mentoring programs or workshops you can put in place to help property owners. I mean, you do that already to a certain extent, but really open it up for.
Are there any
real estate
fee,
agents or other people that are aware of these things and help them in the whole process?
are there any other fees that could be reduced?
So there aren't any fees for most of our residential applications. I think the exception is for demolition. Maybe relocation.
What about expedited permit review?
I think that we already do that
Okay,
to an extent, like we have a pretty good.
I'm trying to think of
Yeah.
other things we could add here.
Well, and then are there loan programs that the city can do for helping property owners? Because obviously we've had these flood issues with some of the property owners that come before us and been like, you know, this is really onerous, with that being an opportunity that the city can provide loan opportunities to these property owners.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't explored it from a legal side, but with
So that's just about what we had spoken about with this assisting a private property owner. Now, if it's under the statutes that apply to disasters, that is related to disaster, but simply just being a historic and saying, hey, I need you to pay for my roof, I haven't found legal
But
authority.
I'm saying loan, not necessarily it being.
But that's what I'm saying, that I haven't found legal authority for either grant or loan.
If someone did sell their transfer development rights, say in Sailboat Bend, does that property, then the value of that property would go down? So does the county recognize that if you sell your rights, do they have a system where they would recognize that somebody sold their rights and that they will then value that property less?
I'm not sure how the BCPA would view it, but the documents are ultimately recorded with the county. And so that information is on record for the future.
So, okay, so it is, so then that property owner could petition the county.
They'll never tell you how they calculate land. I've asked them
Yeah.
500 ways. They just will not be very clear about it ever. You can ask them, they just don't take a position.
But a property owner would have to disclose that they've done that if they
Yeah,
already sell their
yeah.
property anyway, so it would be on the record.
Yeah,
But it would
If
be a
you
nice,
didn't, then it's a lawsuit.
right, of course, but it would be a good incentive for homeowners to receive
That's a great
revenue
point.
from selling their
and then. have
their
the
rights,
assessment.
and then also having their
That's a great
property
point.
values
Reflect,
decrease,
yeah.
and so that's a double whammy, so I think there's a lot of potential with these transfer development rights. And to Richard's point, I think it would be a good idea to have maybe some kind of feasibility study of Sailboat Bend, maybe in particular, of what is the potential, what is the maximum number of units that could be transferred, to see if we should do anything to optimize.
Yeah, I mean, there's other, there's over 60 landmarks.
Okay.
And so a lot of them do qualify for this program as well, not just properties within the Sailboat Bend Historic
Okay.
District.
Are a lot of the landmarks privately owned?
There's a fair
Yeah.
amount, yeah.
What if it-
Consider a landmark that's privately owned, like what?
Like the Hyatt or whatever, right, that Raleigh restaurant top that recently came before us to
Oh,
be
Pier
designated,
66.
yeah, be
Yeah.
designated as historic, that's a large
It's-
property.
Yeah, and it's not,
They're coming before us to be designated.
it already came before the Historic Preservation Board a year ago. They did ask for a deferral from the city commission because they wanted to get closer to completion on construction
Right.
prior to final designation, but ultimately they have an agreement to become designated with the city. So there's multiple properties. There's the Southside Fire Station that's designated individually. Mr. Adams owns 3 properties that are
What about-
privately owned and
What
designated.
about the Ferguson store on Federal Highway?
It's also been deferred.
So when?
As of now, it's April 2nd.
Why so long? That's been on our agenda for years.
Well, it did come for, I mean, it's been
Yeah.
to the Historic Preservation Board already. It's just pending the city commission.
Okay, oh, it is, okay.
But we have, we have a fair number of landmarks throughout the city that are privately owned. And can take advantage of this program potentially.
just seems like there should be more of like an organized fashion of like a call to offers where there's an aggregation of the transfer development rights, not sort of a one
Yeah.
like pick off as you go, because it's a very opaque marketplace. Most marketplaces have a bid and an ask. You can see what someone's paying, what someone's asking to be paid. So if a developer wants to come and buy rights, it would be interesting to have a call for offers on those rights, have it aggregated, have it pooled, have proper representation of what they should be valued at, and have them sold, rather than sort of it never happening.
Are
That's
you,
the
are
part.
you asking the city to do this?
I'm asking for some mechanism of,
Or you could do an RFP.
there you go.
And put it out into the
Right.
universe and say, here's the maximum.
Here's what
number
we're
of
looking for,
units,
right,
And is there a private entity possibly?
right.
That would be interested in owning this? And I believe, and we could look at other cities and see if there's best practices. I worked for the Atlanta Development Authority and there was a Chattahoochee Hill Country that was trying to keep low density. And I believe they were selling the rights to a private entity that would then sell it in Fulton County to create higher density in certain areas. So I think there's some private companies that would be interested to manage this.
Especially
Well,
if there's
the
no,
way that it works here
pull
is
out.
once they're sold to a specific location and they're sold to that location in perpetuity.
but what are they
Yeah.
worth to a location if you really can't aggregate any like any real amount, right? To get to the density unit, we can interchange them all we want, but at the end of the day, they gotta get to a receiving site
Uh-huh.
with some quantity that's worthwhile. Like, what are they gonna do with 6 units? 8 units, what are you gonna do with my 2 units? You know,
Well, like the
So,
idea is that
you
you
know.
would potentially have units.
but I think it would be a great way to have an arm's length deal happen. Now, I'm not asking the city to be the broker.
Right.
But it'd be awesome if the city, they love to hire consultants, if we can hire a consultant to sit through the idea of Steve's client bringing an RFP or us working through, we want to build a building, right? We want to build a high rise. We don't have any units allocated. We don't have any density, but we really want to build a building. Where can we find the units? Well, just using Sailboat Bend as an example. Why don't we throw it out to Sailboat Bend, see who's willing to part ways? And it's not a windfall, but it's not a minor amount of money that may find their way into those pockets. And then there's an adequate sort of fight. There's an adequate negotiation on who's gonna get paid what. They get to build their building, the owners get paid. And I do think Broward County should look at it and say, all right, we're gonna reduce the land assessment because you no longer have a right to build. It's gone. So it's like a win all the way around. Your taxes go down, you put money in your pocket, the developer gets to build the building. It seems to have been implemented and codified for exactly this reason, but there's no one's pushing them off the diving board. Like
Yeah.
someone's got to
Right.
jump in the pool,
And then
you
you've
know?
achieved historic preservation on that property.
Right?
For.
Right.
Which is why we're here every day. So do we hire a consultant, you know, I mean, like, I don't know, you know, that's the next question.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's not something that.
Hire a good attorney.
Well, I guess at this point.
Yeah,
too,
I mean-
It sounds like this board actually can't do any of these things.
Yeah.
So it's more like we're voting to make a motion to ask the city to explore more, to adjust or change some of these things that we discussed. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be.
So- We're limited to what we can do.
So you would have to be very specific in what you're asking the city to do. So remember that the city doesn't handle, for example, the property assessment, all that stuff. That's them. So somebody who wants them to change how they do things would have to go there.
Right.
So Florida statutes with how, the tax incentives, that kind of thing, gotta go to the legislature. So you'd have to be very specific about what you want the city to do, that it can do. So.
I think two things the city could do is do a study to tell us what is the potential, how many units are we talking about in the city? And number two, doing a best practice of maybe some private entities or how can we create this marketplace? Those two things.
The only thing that I would recommend, with that is that keep in mind that the Broward County Land Use Plan requirements and the restrictions we have in Broward County are not the same as, for example, in Miami. So Sunny Isles Beach, they were very successful with their TDR. In fact, the city would actually sell its, development rights on its own property, and they had a bank and everything, right? But keep in mind that our land use plan, it has to be consistent with Broward County. So if we look at somebody, for example, in Pensacola, I'm just throwing that out there, just because they had success with what they're doing, it's not the same as Fort Lauderdale, because, just being quite frank, our code is very developer friendly. That's just the way it is. So it has a lot of great things for developers here. And so that may not be the same in Oakland Park or wherever, right? So just keep in mind that a study would really be more useful as it's limited to Broward County, just because, they don't have the same restrictions over there in wherever, so.
Okay, so is it something that we could include in the motion that we did last month, is saying, we want you to consider in that consulting practice research that they advise you that these are some of the things you can change in that process?
I mean, I guess I'm.
Because that's a revitalization, that's one of the things that they could explore, is how they could financially create incentives as part of their research process and make those recommendations to the city, rather than us having limitations of what we can do.
Are you calling the city they?
Commissioners?
Okay. Just wanted to define it.
I interpreted the motion for the revitalization plan as to do with the Himmershey district as well as the, something different than what we were speaking with regarding the TDRs, because the TDR is more as a citywide thing where it gets transferred somewhere else in the city. So
But it would include that, because those are historic or contributing properties as much as Himmershey and Devil Down, so they would actually have that option too, so it wouldn't engage some of the other properties that are outside of those districts, but it would be one of the things that they could explore.
Well, I guess where I was going with this is that if the focus is to get to the TDRs, the consultant that's exploring other things such as providing workshops and other things or whatever. I don't know how long that consultant will spend doing that, but if you would like an answer on the TDRs, and you limit it to Broward County, you could hire a consultant for that and we could get to that and that would answer that. And so he could get the answers he's looking for and move on, yes or no.
Make sure you're on this.
Rather than get tied up in, I guess, you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah, all the
having
other-
parties and where, I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but you know what I mean. So that's not related to this, but I just a suggestion to keep it separate and limited to Broward County because it just wouldn't be useful otherwise.
Mr. Adams, are you trying to acquire TDRs or sell your TDRs?
So,
Sell them.
so the intent of these things is to preserve buildings.
Right.
So if you are thinking about this management property.
Yeah.
You get this money to compensate for the headache. of it,
Right.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So people that aren't historic very well may become.
Yeah.
And other cities also do it with green space. for instance. So you can never develop on that property, that's a point.
Sure.
For agricultural, whatever, but
Right.
it's a great win-win-win.
Mhm.
It's with the developer, the seller, and the city. Should be.
Yeah, it just seems to lack an aggregator. That's
Right.
the problem.
Yes, a lot of them have banks going.
Yeah.
Sure, you mentioned that, where someone else can buy the units. They can then hold them forever. if they
Sure.
want to resolve, but we're not set up that way. Unfortunately, it has to go directly to the developer. There's an 18-month expiration.
Oh, is that
I'm
true?
already 14 months into it.
Okay.
I know I can probably extend it, but the developer doesn't know, and the language isn't written that way. So if there's just so many little hurdles
Yeah,
in our language.
Yeah.
You just can't do it.
So
This-
Okay.
study would be a good thing. Study, we just tried to point out a few ideas today that you might want to study. And,
Okay,
and we encourage you to try to find ways to make it work.
And we're the experiment.
okay, you are. Tricia, anything else?
No.
Sherry,
No, I just would like the motion to be, very specific.
is,
and clear
is
for
somebody
staff.
making a motion on anything?
I'll make the motion, but last month was a board meeting and that was a difficult thing to make. a
Oh,
motion.
you just have to read the whole script. Sherry will help
It
you.
was very intimidating.
Well, we edited along the way, so.
Sorry.
I still mess it up and I've been here for 6 months, so.
Okay, I'll make an attempt and then if anybody wants to jump on and help. So I'll make a motion to ask the city staff to study the transfer development rights for maximum potential, the number of units that are currently available, and to look at best practices within Broward County on how to optimize this program.
So the only thing I would suggest to change, that's great, is that under the charter, the city manager has to tell staff what to do. So you have, your suggestion is to just say a motion to recommend to the city commission to have the city manager have staff. It's really weird, but yeah, that's how you normally.
Okay, so can I just add that then?
Yeah, yeah,
So
so
the
to
motion
have
then
the city-
includes for the city manager to ask
Staff,
the
yes.
staff, city staff
Yes.
to do
yes.
this.
So city commission to direct the city manager to
Okay.
have staff.
So that's the motion.
Second.
Anything?
You wanna read it back or?
Yeah.
So now,
To recommend the city commission have city manager have staff study the TDR for a maximum potential number of units currently available and look at best practices in Broward County
To maximize the program, yeah,
to maximize.
to optimize the program.
the city program.
City program.
And, just to tag along with what they were saying, so, that's the consultant that's gonna look at that. Would that include a potential land use plan amendment or requesting additional units if necessary? Would that include any of the stuff that they were asking for or no?
So you wanna include the phrasing of hiring a consultant to evaluate the land use?
Well,
Practices?
if you want to, I'm not advocating, he's not my client, I'm just
Yeah,
saying that's
yeah.
what they were talking about, so I wanted to be fair that they showed up
Okay.
here for a reason, so
I'm
that.
seeing
you-
nods, so yes,
Possibly.
how to word that?
So just to evaluate the land use plan and see if there's potential to request additional units
Okay,
in order to facilitate possible, improve the TDR program.
that's a good part of it.
What Sherry just said.
Yeah, very good.
So
to
I just
include,
wanted
yes.
to make sure I took,
Thank you.
I was listening, don't worry.
That's good. That's good.
Yes, so, if
Okay,
you got that, I just want to make sure.
To evaluate the land use plan and see if there is the potential to increase units. Blah, 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 the TDR program. I missed that in between there.
and potential to request additional units,
Yes.
but additional units for
So I guess what they were saying is that because we pretty much ran out of units, they want to be able to somehow incorporate the request for additional units into the ability to get more units in through the TDR program. So that's what the consultant would evaluate. Now, we're not advocating for a yes or no. It's just, I believe that's what, if I'm wrong, correct me, if that's.
But for, just to
Just
clarify,
trying to be good.
story.
Yeah, okay, just starting for, it's just for the consultant to look at, that's all. That's all
Consultant
we're saying.
evaluate that
We're not
process.
saying do it, it's just to
Right.
somehow.
but for historic properties to get additional units or.
No, for historic, for there to be
sell the
additional
units.
property. So that when historic properties are transferring their rights, that people actually have a pool to pull from. To make those units of value. So right now, if people can't get any units, then who cares that somebody's got 10 units if they can't get anything approved because there's no units in the pool.
Hard units.
Right,
Yeah, I mean, it's not too much of an issue for the historic properties and.
And remember, you're not saying here you agree, you know,
Yeah,
they're saying.
I'm just trying to
you know,
figure out,
Yeah,
I'm trying to understand this.
I'm not agreeing.
The issue isn't that the historic property doesn't have the units, it's that when they get rid of the units there's no market to
There's
sell
no
them
market,
because
yeah.
there's no value to them because they can't actually build anything.
But that's what we're leaving the consultants to
Right,
evaluate
but
for,
I'm
is
just
that.
like, yeah, so it's like, we want a consultant to evaluate that process to see if there's even any solution there.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that the request was more on the receiving end as far as like the ability for the receiving sites to obtain additional units.
Yes.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a simple way.
That's one way to do it.
yeah,
That's what I thought we were talking about. What else would we be talking about?
Well, it just
Well-
sounded like
Historic property side, yeah.
request additional units.
Oh,
And
you're
so,
clear.
like, to be more specific.
Yeah.
Is that on the receiving end or the sending end?
Patricia, just to be super clear, the only way those TDRs are valid and can be transferred is if it becomes a contributing property, if it is not a contributing property at the time. That's the only way.
Can you
Right.
repeat that?
The only way to have a TDR function as a deal, I want to sell you 2 TDRs. Okay, my house,
Mhm.
not that I'm selling them, has to now be designated as historic, correct?
It has to be contributing or designated as a landmark.
Well, let's just assume it's not gonna be a landmark. We're talking about residential properties. It has to be designated historic, which are contributing. But you still have to interpret that. That's not just an automatic granting. You still has to go through the
Yeah.
application process.
There is an application.
Okay.
It's a whole
certificate of
process.
eligibility.
Right, right.
There's 2 different types of TDRs that you can apply for. And one is for density,
Okay,
to calculate how many units
okay.
you can transfer, and the other is floor area. For how much floor area you can transfer that a new development could translate into additional height.
But regardless, it needs to be contributing to meet either of those.
And one of the things you pointed out before is that even if a property is not contributing, like if it's in Rio Vista or Holy Hammock or someplace else, they can apply to be contributing, even if they're not currently designated as contributing. So that. makes
No.
sure-
Just if they're not designated at the moment, they can. And they've been found to be eligible. To be designated as contributing or as a landmark, then they can apply for a preliminary certificate of
but
eligibility.
they first have to be
Well,
noted by the city as significant.
yeah, identified in a survey.
Right.
Or identified by the State Historic Preservation Officer as eligible, which. That's in the Florida Master Site file.
But unlike Sailboat Bend, the rest of the city doesn't have, I forget the year, the 1940 something cutoff where there's a presumption to some degree.
No.
No,
There's- And
But it's still 50 years, no matter where the.
It's
property's
50 years,
located.
yeah.
fair enough.
That's national.
yeah, it's a general rule of thumb, but not set fast.
You could be mayor. And have your property designated.
So does someone have we have a motion?
So we have a motion. Did we want to add to the motion this part about adding to the scope that this, to ask the city to look at
I think you're making
How
it complicated
to
now.
get
so I think-
additional units? From the
Well,
county.
we just said they're gonna investigate the land use,
Like consultants.
and maybe we
Okay.
can incorporate that in that study.
I don't know why the land use is the focus, though, to be honest with you. I think the focus should be on the marketplace. How do you create the marketplace?
So,
I'm mindful of the land use respectfully, like,
yeah, so the land, our land use plan has
Right.
to be consistent with the Broward County.
Not
plan. So
arguing that.
The units,
Yeah.
that's in the land. use.
Right.
It says, you know, you got this.
right,
So that's why it's like you can have a conflict with what you're doing with the land use plan amendment. So basically, it's like, it would just be like saying, well, the land use plan, it would just be like saying, hey, I want to give you 200 units, but we don't have that per our agreement with the county, with the land use plan. So anytime we want more units, we have to go to them. That's just how it works. We have
Right.
restrictions, so we could, you know, promise anyone anything. We just couldn't possibly do it. So the marketplace is more of, hey, you know, you're talking about a private deal here, we're, you know, per the Constitution, we're not supposed to aid private, you know, folks subject to certain exceptions. So we have to be careful with that. If they're doing a deal amongst each other, then we don't, you know, notice how we don't advertise certain businesses here. That's the reason it's illegal under the, you know, the Constitution. So we generally don't get involved in, hey, I want you to pay him this, because this is what it's worth. We don't do that as a city.
No.
Our stuff is with a public purpose, so.
I appreciate that. No, I guess I need to make the distinction more subtle. It's hard to do. I don't know how it becomes. I'm just continuing to use Sailboat Bank as an easy example, how it goes from Middle Street or to Cuesta, where property owners become aware of this, because I would argue that probably most are not aware of it. For that to function and then roll into an understanding that this is an available option to you, especially if you have your single family home that has the entitlement of 3 or 4 units. When I say marketplace, how does then that launch into something where there's a response in numbers, so this becomes a real possibility of working for both parties, the cumulative land, the people that own property, and then the developers that want to match with them. So I'm using marketplace, I guess maybe in lieu of matchmaker. It sounds like a civic association meeting would be good for this.
Yeah,
But the practicality of that is that maybe 8% of the neighborhood attends, if they're lucky. So I don't know how this,
it's all how you advertise this.
yeah, but I don't know how this jumps off the paper to anybody. I don't know how this becomes real.
I
Because
think once we get the study though, then maybe that would then we would see what is the potential, and then we could make another motion at some point in the future
How consultants recommend
to
you.
how to implement it.
I do know that the city manager recently had that really pretty magazine that he sends out. I don't know if people read it or anything, but it really looks nice. So,
Okay,
I mean, that's a place where we could possibly put it. That's an idea
Yeah.
I'm just throwing out there.
sure.
You know, I live here too, so I've seen it. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
it's nice. So, you know, it just is something that I look at. I don't trash it, you know what I mean? So that's something that we could put in there, but the consultant, I defer to them. So, you know, we can just do it.
You know, a board member could write an article for Fort Lauderdale magazine and things like that. You know.
Or a mailing list to.
Yeah.
From the city to the properties that are actually eligible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You get a piece of mail, you're probably.
I'm just gonna go around with 6-packs and Sailboat Bend, trade in beer for TRs.
But I think it does get back to the neighborhoods. I think that's really the force
I agree.
here.
Yeah,
Well, in this case, it's a commercial property that's related.
All right, so
Engaged.
we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Can I clarify the motion? 'Cause
Please.
It does,
Can you
ask
read
the
off?
city manager to direct city staff. It's not mentioning anything about a consultant.
Okay,
So
Can we read
at
it
the
or-
moment, it's asking city staff to do this evaluation.
and what is city staff saying?
Right in time for the holidays, here you go.
Just to clarify how it works.
I understand. I
City
know.
staff hires the consultant,
Right.
right? That budget, and then, you know, that's how it works. So
Right,
just if that needs to be clarified, we can do that, but, you know, I don't hire the consultant.
Of course not.
It has to be city staff, but it's not me, it's, you know, them. So, yeah, so.
Okay. I mean, I think it could say direct city staff to obtain a consultant.
I think
I like
that
that.
might be better
I like that,
language,
yeah.
rather
Well,
than,
couldn't we do at least a survey part with staff of trying to figure out what the potential there is if you just use Sailboat Bend? Like, we don't need a consultant to do that, do we?
Like I have some basic numbers for the landmarks. I've not done it for.
When the consultant come to you anyway and say, this is what
Yeah.
data you have for us, and you hand it up to them.
Yeah, each neighborhood you've done, you list and show the
I'm just
potential
worried that,
landmarks.
Like, there's big chance that the city manager is not allocating money to this, so. Or a consultant, so what can we actually do? that
And
is
I don't
useful To us without a city consult, without the city hiring. a
Well,
consultant?
I guess the question is just, I don't know if city staff is staffed to do something like this. Anyway,
We got the motion, so you wanna reread the motion, we can kind of
So if you
proceed.
change it to say to recommend the city commission have the city manager instruct staff to obtain a consultant?
You're making the motion.
Yeah,
Agree with that?
I'm thinking, could it be to have staff and or a consultant hired by staff? And then the rest of the motion. So it'd be and or.
Well, then you know it's gonna be. Staff.
I have a hard time putting so much work on city staff.
Yeah.
Just as a comment,
Yeah,
because I don't think they're equipped to do. I mean, I know you can do it, but it's a matter of time.
I'm a resource.
Well, I think, what you guys are talking about and requesting are like about the actual marketplace and like more of a real estate angle, and that's just something I'm not qualified to do. We put together this this ordinance of the ability to do this program, but we're not the developer, we're not the property owner.
Someone in
We're not
private
doing
practice
real
needs to
estate
go put it
transaction.
together. Yeah.
So we need to hire a
But
consultant.
isn't
Staff.
the city manager, I mean, they manage the whole staff, so they're gonna know, like, if you're feeding an option for staff or a consultant, you're giving him options. He's gonna understand the capacity of his staff, he's gonna understand the capacity of his budget and try to figure out if he can figure this out from wherever.
I agree. Let the
It's
city.
up to the
manager-
maker of the motion.
Yeah, let the city manager decide.
Okay.
So do it as an and or city staff and or a consultant.
Or consultant, okay. Second,
I'll second it.
Did you want to read the rest though, before we go forward?
the second part to evaluate the city's land use plan and see if there's potential to increase units for the TDR program. That's the second part, right?
Is that?
And, okay, so I guess, can you read the whole thing?
Yeah, read it all in a whole sentence.
Thank you.
Well, one, to recommend the city
No, start from the beginning.
have
Oh,
the,
yeah,
that
okay,
is the beginning.
okay, sorry.
Have the city commission, have the city manager instruct staff to study or to obtain a consultant to study the TDR for the maximum potential number of units currently available and look at best practices of Broward County to optimize the TDR program. And two, evaluate the city's land use plan, see if there is potential to increase units for the TDR program. Yes,
That's it.
Is there a second?
Can I
Oh,
suggest?
please,
increase
jump in.
units For receiving site for the TDR program,
Couldn't hear
for
you.
receiving site.
Increase units for the
For
receiving
receiving
sites.
sites.
It just limits it to just this. part.
Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
confusing.
No, it makes it very
Two different sites.
specific, yeah.
that's just for the second part,
Yeah,
increase units for the receiving sites for the TDR program.
Yes.
This is an entire ordinance, so somewhere that is somewhere to be read. The TDR, yeah.
oh, yeah.
Do you know the number, Sherry? Yeah,
I can even.
Article
Awesome.
12.
12,
Would the entire board like it or?
that'd be great.
Sure. So is there a second?
second, right?
Oh, you did, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No, please stay.
So is there any other communications in the city are good for the city?
Anything? Well, no, this is not,
Have a good night,
well,
guys.
yeah.
Take it easy.
You have something?
Take care.
Thank you. Make a motion to adjourn.
Take care.
Is there a second?
Second.
We're adjourned.
Okay.